Recently, an opinion piece made its way around the internet. The headline read, "Suggested move to plant-based diets risks worsening brain health, nutrient deficiency." Is there any truth to this? I'll give you my analysis on this so-called choline crisis, and if you stick around to the end, well, I've got a rant brewing in me for this week's Bring the Heat segment. This is the Dr. K Show. I'm Dr. Karthik Ramanan. I help ambitious individuals end self-criticism with tools and strategies to create optimal, everyday mental health. If we're just meeting and you need to silence that critical voice in your head to get out of your own way and live a purposeful life, well, I'm here for you. I encourage you to subscribe right now. It's showtime! Emma Derbyshire, PhD, recently wrote an opinion piece in BMJ Nutrition entitled, "Could we be overlooking a potential choline crisis in the United Kingdom?" Her main points were that the majority of Europeans, Americans, Canadians, and Australians are not meeting adequate intake for the nutrient choline. By the way, adequate intake means that, hey, we know that a nutrient is important, but we don't have a guideline for how much you should get. Otherwise, it would be called an RDA, recommended dietary allowance. Okay, back to the choline crisis. Choline is an essential nutrient that is involved in creating the structure of your cell membranes, involved in fat transport and metabolism, and DNA synthesis. It's also related to nervous system function, as it's a precursor to acetylcholine, which is a critical neurotransmitter that's involved in muscle movement, regulating heartbeat, memory, and many other functions. During pregnancy, choline is involved in modifying brain and spinal cord structure, so it would make sense that low choline intake would be dangerous. Here's where the argument falls flat. For one, the author says that eggs, milk, and meat appear to be major dietary contributors of choline, which is true, and therefore moving away from their intake toward a whole food plant-based approach could result in choline deficiency. Look, that's true if you're replacing those foods with vegan junk food, and that is not what I advocate. If we look at the data listed by the National Institutes of Health, you'll see that beef and eggs top the list of milligrams of choline per serving, but 6 of the top 12 sources are whole plant sources, so a well-diversified whole food plant-based diet with adequate calorie intake will more than satisfy choline needs. So enjoy your beans, potatoes, broccoli, and mushrooms. Are you getting value out of this so far? If so, smash that like button right now. But it goes further, and before I rant about it here, I better hold it in for Bring the Heat. I'm not a fan of reductionistic nutrition. It's easy to break down foods into their components, identify one component is important, and make a huge stink about a potential deficiency that rarely shows up clinically in individuals who eat a well-rounded whole food diet. It's also easy to ignore the potential risks associated with overconsumption of the foods that have the highest concentration of said nutrient. So let's dive into what else choline is associated with. Trimethyl N-amine oxide, otherwise known as TMAO, is a metabolite produced by our gut bacteria in response to foods rich in choline and L-carnitine, such as eggs and red meat. TMAO is a topic unto itself, but overproduction of it can result in platelet clumping and atherosclerosis. TMAO is associated with higher mortality rates in some patients. Choline supplements have been shown to increase platelet aggregation. This information was nowhere to be found in the recent news headlines. A study of nearly 48,000 men in the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study found that men with the highest intake of choline had a 70% increased risk of prostate cancer. Also, not found in the recent headlines. A paper in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition examined 120,000 participants and found that higher choline intakes were associated with higher risk of all-cause and cardiovascular mortality, death. As you guessed it, not mentioned in the recent headlines. By the way, a 2015 study examined several studies looking at choline intake and neurological health, and the conclusion was, quote, "Evidence to confirm the suggested effects of choline on health in different stages of life is scarce." So yeah, look, the bottom line is this: when we reduce foods to their nutrients and glorify some and vilify others, we don't get to see the big picture. And frankly, we also don't get to pick and choose which results we want. That's not how human physiology works. So let's make this easy, shall we? Focus on a diverse group of whole plant foods. Reduce and strive to eliminate processed foods and limit animal product intake to whatever you feel is necessary for you. For me personally, that's 0. If you find that certain foods are disagreeable to your constitution, consider doing a food allergy panel to give yourself a guideline on how to individualize your food to your needs. Bonus tip for you: pay attention to who funds the research. The author of this BMJ Nutrition opinion piece has received funding from the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board, which represents the interests of beef, lamb, pork, and dairy producers. That doesn't prove anything, nor do I judge or fault anyone for making a living doing something that they believe in. Personally, I think if we all had the same background and experiences of other people, we'd probably take similar actions. It's just something to keep in mind when you're trying to figure out what this means for you. Dig deeper, look at the big picture, don't just look at the headlines, and recognize that one new headline doesn't throw away everything else that you've ever learned about nutrition. Question of the day: do you ever get confused with sensationalist nutrition news headlines? If you do, let me know in the comments below and let's have a conversation about it. Today's Progress Success is brought to you by Lori from Instagram. She's going back to school after taking time off to stay home and raise her girls. She writes, "Needed your motivation on how to do things you don't want to do today too. Perfect timing. I did really well on a big Anatomy and Physiology 2 test, and it was so hard to sit down and do homework for other classes that night. Seeing your video was literally perfect timing, and I was able to finish and complete it all. Thank you." That's so awesome, Lori. Learning how to do things even when we don't feel like it is a skill that pays off in so many areas of life. And like everything, it's a practice. It's easy to make excuses. It's hard to take action anyway. I am very, very proud of you. It's rant time. You know what I've got a low tolerance for these days? Reductionistic nutrition. When people label a whole food as a carb or a protein, it makes no sense to me because the foods we consume are so much more than that. We label a donut as a carb when in fact most of its calories come from fat. We don't consider spinach as a protein even though 25% of its caloric value comes from proteins. It's easy to say choline is an essential nutrient and believe that more is better until we realize there's a tipping point where the studies suggest that too much can lead to heart disease, prostate cancer, and death. Furthermore, when we break down foods into their components, we're assuming that we are identifying all of their parts. Let's be honest, do we really know all of the thousands of micronutrients and all their functions, both in isolation and all together as a symphony? We don't get to pick and choose which nutrients help us and which ones we want to ignore, so why not look at foods as the entire symphony of ingredients? It's just too easy for us to slap labels on nutrients and diets and then pick sides. It's just so easy to pay attention to a sensationalist nutrition headline that's motivated by more than just pure science. Let's choose to rise above and look at the big picture. I choose to look at nutrition like this. Who has the physical and mental health, the vitality and the longevity that I want? Who lacks the chronic disease that I don't want? That's the starting point for me to determine how I should eat. And it's pretty clear to me reading all the quality research that eating mostly whole plants as they're found in nature, that's how to achieve everyday mental health and longevity. And I know you too can move past this confusion that's just got us to the point of eating whatever because who knows? Just stop it. Your health, your life is worth so much more than that. I believe in your greatness.